In terms of whether I see the world moving in a better or a worse direction, let me just go through a quick list of all of the things that we see in the risk report. What's good? What's bad? Where do I come out? Good. No surprise to anyone here. U.S. stability. The fact of the matter is that an increasingly large share of the world's energy, the largest producer of the world's food, the critical technologies that are being developed happen to be in the world's largest economy, but also happen to be in a place that's very stable, that has rule of law, that is wealthy. That is an advantage. Increasingly, the world's largest supplier of energy isn't in a place that is internally unstable and isn't in a place where foreign powers are going to be grabbing and competing over each other for it. That's a useful thing. American stability matters, even as Washington gridlock upsets and unnerves us. Second big positive, Africa. 1.2 billion people in a landmass that's bigger, much bigger than India and China combined. They're getting it right. They're not getting it right hugely quickly, but they're getting it right. Most of the African governments are improving in their governance. 50% of the African continent is urbanized. Only 20% of growth in GDP comes from commodities. That's a very positive story. It's only going to get much more positive going forward. Not without extraordinary hardship and corruption and famine and warfare. Certainly, it's Africa. It's poor, but it is not the lost continent. It will not be the lost continent again. Relatedly, rise of the middle classes. Rise of the middle classes across the world, the extraordinary reality that we have increasingly so many folks from very different backgrounds, very different kinds of education that can be an active part of the global economy, not just as consumers, but also in helping to come up with solutions to global problems. That is an enormous amount of international talent that largely will alleviate poverty and largely will be a force for good and needs to be seen as such, even if the American middle class is shrinking. American boats will be risen by the rise of the global middle class as global challenges require global solutions. Technology. Productivity, progress, absolutely, but also more people with information in their hands and more diffusion away from large concentrated areas and individuals being able to affect change. You look at a place like India or Indonesia and you see how individuals in local areas are able to band together, learn about local corruption, do something about it, overturn an official that's been a kleptocrat or a nepotist, or most likely both. Those are very positive developments in terms of technology. I'll get back to technology in a second because there's a lot of downside. Then the final upside that I found was conflict aversion. I mean, I was with Dr. Doom last night, my buddy Nouriel Roubini. He is fundamentally more dour about stuff than I tend to be. So I always have to think of what I'm going to say that ultimately is going to trump him. And what you say that ultimately trumps him is that the desire of most people involved in intractable conflict at the end to go one extra mile to try not to go to war tends to win out over time. Doesn't always win out, and we know the historical examples. But when I think about when I was a PhD student listening to Essence of Decision, Graham Allison, and talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Kennedy saying that there was a 1 in 3 chance that we were going to have global thermonuclear war, I never bought it. And I didn't buy it because we weren't talking about when push really had come to shove, and Khrushchev would have given it a second and a third and a fourth thought before he pushed that button. And God forbid he pushed it. It wasn't automatic that Kennedy was going to respond. Kennedy would have been thinking about what he was doing and the implications and what that meant for him. And he was gone anyway. We're not theory. We're not computer programs. We're human beings. And ultimately, that's probably the only good reason to truly be an optimist over the long term.